Even if one area of your life is just dying and struggling and it's hard right now, doesn't mean that everything has to suck. It doesn't mean that everything that year is a write-off and you should just stop trying. Like, the two can coexist, you know? And so some of the tools that I used that like helped get me through my burnout were really focusing on connections. So like connecting with joy. What are those small moments of joy, that things that light me up, that get me excited, that make me smile? And these can be small little things. I call them little like pockets of peace. Like, how can you incorporate those in your days and your weeks? Because when you're super down, depressed, sad, overwhelmed, burnt out, whatever, these little things make such a huge difference. They might be the little 5-minute pick you up that you need that gets you through the next hour, that gets you through the next 2 hours. You know, are they going to solve all your problems? No, but these little things, when you can start incorporating them into your day and your weeks, they're small little boosts of pick me up throughout the week that help.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I am incredibly grateful for you all for the growth of the show that we've seen in particular this summer has been phenomenal. And I really address that to the guests. The guests have been just so great. They've been raw, they've been authentic, they've been real, and they've been relatable. And so shout out to everybody who's been on the show so far. You guys have really been a big part of the success that we've seen. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Take a second, drop a review, really helps the show grow. Also, check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. And again, thank you all for the continued support. Today's guest is Erin Stafford. She's a best-selling author, burnout survivor, high-performance strategist, and Cambridge social psychologist. From working with the world's highest achievers throughout her 20-plus year international career, being a lifelong Type A poster child herself, as well as interviewing and surveying thousands of Olympians, Fortune 100 leaders, and celebrities. She has seen firsthand how hustle culture and constant overachievement are coveted in the world of business, yet can lead to debilitating burnout. As the former head of marketing in the nation's largest healthcare staffing company, she helped drive 27x growth in 6 years. She's passionate about helping leaders and teams be more resilient in the face of change, sustain peak performance, and thrive again, both personally and professionally. Erin, thank you for joining me.
You got the whole bio there. You got the long one on that one. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I read it and I got excited for so many reasons. I can tell you already, we're not going to have enough time to discuss all of them. But all these topics hit home for many reasons. Myself, I worked in investment banking for a little bit. So I, was definitely thrown in the pit as it pertains to a high performance culture. Also, I geek out when it comes to social psychology. I think it is the coolest field. And I tell my wife all the time, if I were to start all over, or if I had the chance, which I could if I wanted to, go back to school and really dive into something, it probably would be social psychology.
Yeah.
I think it's just such a cool field to be.
Well, it's fascinating and it's also enormous. Like there's so many different aspects of it that you can study.
Yeah. Why don't we just start there? When it comes to social psychology, tell me a little bit about what drove you there.
I am somebody who has had like 10 different careers. I've done a million different things. I am not somebody that has a linear career trajectory. I am all over the map, but everything I've done has really been in the sort of like advertising, marketing, media, communications, creative world. So it means I've never had to completely start from the bottom because I'm roughly in the same orbit, but lots of different things. And I tell you that because I was working as a celebrity stylist in Hollywood, dressing people for the Academy Awards, Emmys, Grammys, all the things, photo shoots, commercials. I was working as an image consultant, working with what I call normal people, just helping them really feel better about the way they look. And I had always wanted to go back and get a master's degree. My dad is a PhD from Harvard, and I always wanted a degree from a really first-rate institution. And I got into Cambridge and ended up studying social psychology and really digging deeper on this is like a whole other aside, but I really dug into like what affects how we feel about ourselves. What are the different factors that affect? And it kind of tied into my image consulting styling background because I truly felt like I was a therapist working with those people. You know, somebody would be so down on themselves and feel so terrible about themselves. And all I would do is just put them in a certain outfit or show them how to tailor something. And you would just see them completely change the way they looked in the mirror. And all of a sudden they're like checking themselves out and they're like, damn, I look pretty good, you know? And so I was really studying kind of like the different factors that affect how we feel about ourselves in a nutshell. I mean, it was way more esoteric than that, as you can imagine, but that's roughly what it was.
That's awesome. And as you've continued to navigate your career, I can only imagine how it's played a role for you.
For sure.
And clearly burnout is a hot topic and then something that you're probably the best person to speak to about this topic. But I want to do some build up because I think that that's going to be the crux of today's episode. And you had mentioned your father, the fact that he had a PhD and went to Harvard, and it makes me want to ask you a little bit more questions with regards to just your upbringing, family life.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, where life kicked off for you.
I feel so fortunate. I have the best parents in the world. They are still together. They've been married for like 55 years. They still live in the same house that I grew up in. So I had a very stable childhood, and I pinch myself for that because I know damn few actually have that. And my parents were always just super loving, very supportive, always wanted us to do our best. I have one brother. They always wanted us to work hard. But if like, as long as we were doing our best and working our hardest, if we got a C, then that was great. It was never like you have to have straight A's. It was just, we want to make sure that you are trying your hardest and you're doing your best, So there wasn't pressure like that, but they definitely both have very strong work ethics. And I think that absolutely, fed into me. I think, going into the social psychology, like my brother was always like the hot guy in school that every girl was like obsessed with, every guy wanted to be. And I never felt like the hot girl in school. And so I think at a very young age, I started associating like accomplishments and achievements with what made me feel good about myself. And so, from a very young age, this whole, my book is called The Type A Trap. And so from a very young age, this sort of achievement addiction started where it felt good. I got accolades from teachers, from friends, from my parents. I was one-upping my brother. I was all of these things. And it's just carried on throughout life. And that's literally why I called my book The Type A Trap, because on the one hand, being type A is amazing. It can lead to absolutely incredible success. But it can also be a trap because we're never happy. The second we accomplish something, we want it bigger, better, faster the next time. We're constantly moving the goalposts, constantly looking for that next sort of high, if you will, And so this has gone on for my whole life until I burnt out spectacularly a few years ago and decided I need to change my ways a little bit.
You make me think about myself as you speak. I'm sure you could see the medals behind you. And I tell my wife, in candid conversations, I say, I'm happy, but I don't think I'll ever be satisfied. And I guess in the world of sports in particular, you hear that a lot, like never satisfied is something that you hear a lot. And, and hearing you speak and talk openly about it, I'm interested how your relationship with that phrase has evolved.
Oh God, this is like such a massive thing to unpack. There's so much to say. I'm like,
Let's
where
do
do
it.
I start? Where
Yeah.
should I start? How far back do we go? Never being satisfied. I think so much of it comes from just this deep sense of always wanting to achieve and accomplish more. And on the one hand, I can thank my parents for that. They have given me such unconditional love and such a sense of security that has made me feel like I truly can do and accomplish absolutely anything in the world if I work hard enough, And so I'm so grateful for that. Again, I know that damn few people grow up having that, and I know how lucky I am. But I've always had this real sense of self-confidence, this real sense of ambition and drive. And it's made me want to do and achieve and accomplish all these things. And so I think for years I was never satisfied because I had a list of like 15 careers I wanted to have. And I was like, okay, I've done the celebrity stylist thing, check. Okay, now I'm a head of a creative agency. Like that's something I wanted to do. Okay, check. Oh, now I'm a reporter. That was something I wanted to do. Okay, check. Like I had all these things that I wanted to do and accomplish. And I don't think I was ever satisfied because I was constantly like, okay, how long am I going to stay in this before I do the next thing I want to accomplish, And it wasn't until I burnt out. So I was the head of marketing for the largest healthcare staffing company in North America, massive, like $11 billion, hyper growth, grew 27x in 6 years, like massive company. We had 50,000 clinicians working for us, thousands of corporate employees. And as you can imagine, doing healthcare staffing during the pandemic was like its own special kind of hell. And I really burnt out in that experience. My team was burning out. Our clinicians were burning out. And that was kind of the first moment where I was like, gosh, like I have a great job. I'm making good money. We're doing good work. But like, I am so miserable. And why am I so unhappy? And why do I feel so dead inside? And why am I feeling so empty? Because on paper and on LinkedIn and on my resume, everything looks like it's great, And so I really had this sort of reckoning, and it came to a head when my boss called me up and asked me if I wanted to resign, which is nothing I'm proud of because I am somebody who like works hard and wins. And if I don't win, I didn't work hard enough, Like I have never in my life been fired. I have never been put on a performance plan. I have never been asked if I want to resign, Like I am somebody who accomplishes and achieves. And I just was at this point where I just wasn't myself. I was burnt out and it was noticeable. And thank God my boss didn't fire me. He actually gave me a second chance and instead just asked me if I wanted to resign. And I didn't. But it was a wake-up call, and it really made me reevaluate kind of what success looks like. What does happiness look like to me? Because I had the job and the money and the career, but I was still so miserable. And so I was like, okay, well, job, title, and money clearly aren't it for me. I mean, obviously it's important to have money, like that makes your life a hell of a lot more comfortable, but it's really not everything. And so I had to do a bit of a deep dive to figure out like, what does success look like for me? Where am I going to be happy? What is the lifestyle I want? What are the things I want to do with my time? Because I'm clearly not satisfied right now. How can I create a life that not only looks good, but feels good,
Yeah. Did you ever notice any of these patterns with your parents? I mean, you meant when you talked about your parents, you did talk about the one attribute being hard work.
Very hard
Um,
work. Yeah.
and we all know that like generationally there are definitely some differences between our parents'
Baby
generation and
boomers.
now
Yeah.
yeah, and ours, right? And the way that they approached work and the notion of work life balance and so on and so forth. And I'm interested. You found yourself in this position, and perhaps you and not in a negative way. Perhaps you just weren't equipped to handle it.
I just think that I had handled it for years, and I had been there for like 6, 7 years, and I was just over it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was ready to do something different. The pandemic had knocked the wind out of me and everybody else in healthcare. Again, I wasn't on the front lines. I know that that was a whole different can of worms, but I was getting nurses to the front lines, and it was intense. And I also still had things I wanted to tick off my career list, and I'd sort of done the corporate thing. And now I was really starting to think seriously about speaking and being an author. And yeah, I stayed at the company for another probably year and a half after my boss had asked me if I wanted to resign. I think I stayed for like another year and a half. And at that time, I was starting to put building blocks in place of like, how can I pivot to my next career, which is now speaking and being an author. Um, and I'm so much happier now. But yeah, I mean, I do think my parents absolutely played a role in that. Like they're very hard workers. My dad, I think he liked what he did, but I don't think it was his passion. I think, he was the breadwinner and he needed a good job. And so he worked hard to take care of us. My mom was very much following her passion and doing what she wanted to do. She was the executive director of a big performing arts high school, and theater and drama and performing arts is literally her life. And so I saw from her the beauty of really following your passion and being so excited and passionate about your work. And she obviously worked hard. And then my dad absolutely worked hard, but I never got the sense that he was like fired up and jazzed about his work. It was more like a job.
Well, speaking of passions, what were some of your passions early on?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, what a shocker. I was really competitive. So I was a competitive swimmer. I swam on just literally since I was like 3, 4 on a year-round club teams, varsity swim team, like did state championships, all that stuff, played tennis, dance. Thanks to my mom, I grew up doing musical theater as well. So love singing, love dancing. You can easily get me into a karaoke bar, my friends. And yeah, so dance, fitness, swimming, tennis, theater, those were some of my passions and still are.
And when it I guess the reason I asked that, because my next question was going to be, what did you want to be when you grew up? When I think go back to younger you.
Yeah. I think, gosh, there's always been a lot of things that I wanted to do, but I think what I do now is really part of it. I grew up with my mom being in theater and the performing arts. I grew up in Southern California, just outside of LA. So I was around that. I went to a performing arts high school. So I was around that a lot. And I think the notion of being in the performing arts in some capacity was probably like what I wanted to do when I grew up. But that is truly something that you have to give 1000% to, or you're never going to make it. And even if you do that, you may not make it. And I was always interested in too many other things to really devote all of my attention just to that. And so I pursued all the other things I was interested in. And now I feel like it's sort of come full circle where now I speak on stages all over the world and I write books, and like I kind of feel like I'm doing that, even though it's not technically performing arts, but like I'm fulfilling a lot of that interest of mine, of being on stage, of sharing a story, of connecting with an audience, of making an impact, of creating some sort of transformation in these people's lives, whether it's thinking differently, seeing differently, feeling differently, doing differently. And I think there's a lot of parallels to what I do on stage and what you get out of watching an incredible movie or show or something.
Absolutely. You're definitely working out that muscle. I mean, and that's really what's most important. And the reason I asked the question the way that I asked it is because I consider myself to be type A. And I remember when I was in college and I was thinking about the next 10 years, like a lot of other 20 something year olds, I thought I had it mapped out. This is going to happen and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And it's all going to happen in this timeline. And as we all know, that none of that
doesn't
happened.
happen.
Almost none of it happened. And the timeline was completely messed up, and the zigs and the zags. And I ended up doing things completely different. And similar to you, I couldn't be more grateful for the way that things turned out, because, I'm in a much happier place than if that original plan probably worked out. But when you think about, in general, people who are type A, or people who pride themselves on certain accomplishments and reaching certain goals, a big part of that mindset, or navigating that mindset, is the ability to handle disruption, and is the ability to react when things are kind of taken off course. And I'm interested to hear about, your relationship with disruption.
I feel like I am one tenacious son of a bitch. Like I am one of the most tenacious people you will ever meet. Once I set my mind on something that I'm going to do, I will figure out a way to make it happen. Like it doesn't matter how many no's I get, how many avenues I go down, how many things I try. Like I will figure out a way to make it happen. I love sales. I love networking. I've become pretty adept at like figuring out an avenue into the thing that I want to do. And, and I think part of that, again, going back to my parents, is I think so much of it is because of this sense of security they've given me. And like, even quitting my corporate job, everyone thought I was nuts. They're like, you're quitting this job. People would freaking kill for this job. What are you doing? You're going to go be a speaker? Like, what? People thought I was nuts. But like, I really go back to thinking like, what is the absolute worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, I don't make any money. I can't pay my rent or my mortgage. I have to go back and live with my parents in my 40s, and get back on my feet. They would take me until the day that they die, okay? Like, I could literally say I murdered 5 people and they'd be like, okay, we're going to get you a lawyer. We're going to figure this out, like they would take me until the day they die. And I'm just like, okay, if that's my worst case scenario, that like everything sucks and I can't afford anything, I have to go live with my parents again for a little while to get back on my feet, I'm just sort of like, screw it. Then why not just go for it? Like, if that's the worst case scenario, I can handle that, And so I think it's given me a real sense of security. And I also, like I said, I'm kind of not embarrassed to try. I think so many people that I meet, especially after my talks, they're like, I want to do this, but I'm scared or I'm embarrassed, or like, I don't want to have to start over. Or like, it's especially now with social media, everyone can see you trying. Like, I'm just not embarrassed to just be like, F it, I'm trying, I'm going for it, I think there's something really fun, and maybe it's like the psychopath type A in me. You probably can relate. I think there's something really fun about wanting to do something that feels so absolutely out of reach and intangible, and then freaking doing it, like when you finally do it.
You're like my spirit animal. I'm like listening to you talk, and like, and I, one of the things my wife knows about me is kind of similar to what you said. It's like, if I determine that I want something as far out of reach as it is, like,
we'll figure it out.
If
it may take years, but damn it, I'm gonna do it.
Because two important things I want to call out. The idea of worst case scenario. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because you're not the first person on the show who's brought up that practice. And it is such an important practice that I think we tend to forget around what really is that worst case scenario when it comes to all these things that we want to kind of dive into, right? And when you think about it, like, your worst case scenario is nowhere near as bad as you might think it is.
Yeah, I'm never going to be homeless. I have amazing friends and family. I have plenty of friends that have spare bedrooms that would not charge me a dime to stay there for 6 months, or whatever I need. Like, yeah. I'm going to be fine. I can figure it out,
Yeah. And then the other thing I want to call out is the fact that more often than not, the people who will succeed are the people who could just outlast everybody else. And, you brought up your tenacity earlier. And I think that really is the secret sauce that I feel like a lot of people miss when they're trying to formulate the path to success. And, I say it all the time when people ask me, what I think would be a differentiator. And if I think about certain things that I've done personally, I would be agreeable with you. The fact that I'll stick around longer than everybody else, because.
But also, I think I'm not a perfectionist. I know a lot of type A people are perfectionists. Yeah. I'm actually not. And I think it works in my favor, because I'm not afraid to just go for something with like the lowest viable product, like the like just baseline, like, screw it, I'll try this, like, even when I started speaking, I didn't have any experience. I was just making shit up as I went. Like, I was just going for it, speaking at like random little chambers of commerce for free or for lunch or for $150, like, but like, that's how you get better. And yeah, it can be awkward and uncomfortable, but there's also this sort of like adrenaline rush that you get of like, oh my God, this is going to be like scary, but fun. And I'm excited, but I'm terrified. And like, I like the thrill of it. And I think so often people don't go do the thing they want to do because they're scared and it's not perfect yet. And yet I am somebody who sits back and sees people doing the thing I want to do. And this may sound terrible, but it's true. I sit here and I think, this guy's doing this? Like, this guy's getting paid this much. This chick is getting paid this much to do this. Like, if this person can do it, I totally can do it, you know? And I think that gets me fired up. Not in a negative way, like I think they're terrible, but it's more just like, they're not that great. I mean, I love Mel Robbins. Okay. I spoke at the same conference as her last year, and I listened to her keynote, and it was great, but it wasn't like so great that I'm never going to get to that level great. You know what I mean? Like, it still felt doable. I was like, okay, I see what she's doing. Yeah, she's good at this, but like, it feels attainable, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really, really good call out, and I'm exactly the same. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and it's funny. Like, my wife and I recently went to go see Sebastian Maniscalco,
I
and
love him. Oh my
yeah,
God, I love him. He's my favorite.
he's great, and it was great. But one of the things that I realized while I was there, because similar to you, as someone who has a platform, you realize like he doesn't nail every joke. In fact, there are some jokes where like the audience aren't really clapping or just kind of looking around. And there's something incredibly human about that, because we tend to put people on a pedestal. And the difference between, I mean, there's a lot of differences, I'll say, between myself and Sebastian Maniscalco, but one of the main differences between the everyday person and the person who's actually on stage is just that the fact that the person on stage took the action.
Yeah, they have the
And
guts to try and do it
we say it
and
all the
start.
time, over and over and over again. It's just about taking that first step. That
Yeah.
first step is the hardest step in anything that you want to do,
Yeah.
whether it's getting on stage, whether it's lacing up your shoes, whatever it may be. That first step is incredibly difficult. But, you didn't wake up, you weren't born a speaker, you know?
No. I
And
always say overwhelm is the enemy of action. Like, if you just start taking action, all the overwhelm starts to go away. Like, you just have to start doing something. Move slightly in the direction that you want to go, and it eventually
yeah.
compounds.
Yeah, a recent guest came on the show, and he talked about some of his research showed that when we're born, we have two fears: the
I
fear
heard about
of
this.
loud noises, and the fear of falling. And it's interesting to me because clearly you kind of look at fear and you stare it head on, and you have no concerns with regards to taking the leap as it pertains to certain things. And you called out your parents and the impact that they've had on you and the people around you, and I would agree. I think that environment, or cultivating that environment, is probably the most important things as it pertains to that. But it looks like you
But
want to say something. Yeah.
oh yeah, but I was going to say, but it is just also who I am, because me and my brother grew up in the exact same environment, and my brother and I could not be more different. Like, he is Mr. Path of least resistance. Whatever the easiest way is, that's what he'll do. Like, I am the one. Even I remember, even when we were in, he's 2 years older than me, going to the theater as like kids, it was my mom's in theater, but like intermission, we were old enough to, my parents gave us the money and we went to the intermission stand to buy a Coke or whatever. And we were two little kids. And the person behind the counter says to the guy next to the adult next to us, like, oh, can I help you? But we weren't with that guy. We were next. And me, little like 6-year-old, was like, excuse me, we were next, and like, I just never had a problem saying that. Even I swear to you, even to this day, we're at like the airport. My brother has a question. He's like, can you ask them blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, you go ask them. Like, why do I have to do it? So like, yes, my parents cultivated this, but like, it is truly just, I was born like this as well. Like, this is just naturally who I am, because my brother and I could not be more different.
Well, I mean, and I don't know if you're going to have an answer for this, but I have two kids. I can already tell they're kind of a little bit different. But, in the world of psychology, how would you explain this phenomena? Two kids growing up under the same roof with the same influence, surrounded by a lot of the same environment. why is it and how is it that, they end up being so different? And I don't know if you know the answer, but
I
like,
mean, this
give me
is
your
like
best
over my pay
psychological
grade
guess.
level of psychology.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I truly, I have my thoughts and ideas, but I don't think they're founded in research or data. I think people are genuinely just born different as well. Like, yes, it's nature, but it's also nurture. Like we, your parents can nurture you as much as you can, but I think almost every parent knows like their kids are just different. I don't have kids, so I don't know, but like I see it again and again and again. Me and my brother and friends, etc. Like I think a lot of us are just born a certain way. My parents always said I was born like this, and I've been like this since birth.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, it's an awesome thing to kind of think about and reflect on. I mean, even think about myself and my sister, and the differences. We're very different too. And it's cool to see, because then you see people. The other thing is that I think is cool about it is you see two people coming from the same home and also succeeding, but succeeding in different ways, right?
Completely different ways. Yeah.
And that tells us that there is no uniform definition of
No.
success. And sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and no, this goes back to redefining success for yourself. Like we're so accustomed to thinking it's money and job title. That's what growing up in the Western world specifically, like that's what we are taught. That's what we're shown in TV and on movies. And that's what, we see again and again and again. And ultimately, when you get to a point where you are making good money and you do have the job and you're still freaking miserable, it kind of makes you reevaluate like, well, what does success look like to me? And I'll tell you, for me, like having a flexible schedule was a huge part of that. I am so happy now that I can go take my dog on a walk at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I can just piss off for the afternoon. I live in San Diego, and go to the beach if it's sunny and I want to, and I don't have any meetings or calls planned. And yeah, then that means sometimes I'm working on the weekend because I've, messed around all week and haven't done enough work, and I've got to work on the weekend. But like, I have the autonomy to do that now. And it brings me a lot of joy. And so that is one thing that I really value, is a flexible schedule. And I didn't have that when I was working my corporate job. Some people do. Some corporate jobs are super flexible. Mine wasn't. So yeah, it's just about redefining what that success looks like for you.
I'm the same exact way. I remember, I know a lot of people have different relationships with the pandemic, but I was never more empowered than I was during the pandemic, once we went remote, because all of a sudden I felt like I had my freedom back. And it translated to performance, to be honest. My performance was higher because I was, my trade off was freedom. And and to your point, that made me a lot more satisfied and made me feel a lot more successful than the dollars.
Well, yeah, and
Uh,
you were also probably a better father and a better husband and a better
yeah,
friend, and
exactly.
and just a happier human being as well.
Exactly, and then the dollars were a byproduct of it, and then I think that that's what we see in a lot of instances, right? The dollars end up coming once you get all that other stuff first. So, I think it's just a matter of, for some people, it's a matter of like, where are the priorities? And I'm interested, like when you go on a platform like LinkedIn and you see people with hot button opinions around this topic, in particular around hustle culture, and I'll rest when I die. How does that make you
Yeah.
feel?
The reality is there's some truth to it. The hustle culture is part of our culture because it works. Like there is no denying that if you work around the clock and you work your ass off and you outwork all of your competition, that you will eventually get success. There's no denying that. It's just at what cost, And so at what cost? Is it your health? Because we all know people who've been perfectly healthy and then just dropped dead of a heart attack or a cancer diagnosis, or, look to have the perfect marriage and then they get divorced out of the blue, or the kids won't talk to them. So it's, yes, hustle culture can absolutely lead you to success, but it's often at the cost of your health, your relationships, your mental health, and all of these other trade offs. And so, the reason it's part of culture is because it leads to success. I mean, you look at these startup founders of all of these big tech companies, they didn't get successful by only working 6 hours a day. Like they were working in their basements 23 hours a day. Like I get it, but at what cost? And so, I think that's really the question is sometimes you are in a sprint. And sometimes when you do have a newborn kid, you're in that sprint at home because you're dealing with, sleepless nights and all hands on deck, or you are launching a business and you're going to have 2-3 years of just hardcore sprint. How can we start to counteract that and incorporate moments of rest, proactively rest, incorporate, more mental health and wellness activities into our days and weeks? I'm not saying you're going to go from 100 miles an hour to like having a 3-hour morning routine where you journal and you meditate and you cold plunge and you sauna and you do all this stuff. Like, but can you go from 100 to maybe 95 miles an hour for a little bit? Can we block out a couple hours here and there during the week so that you just don't have any meetings during that time? So like there's all these small adjustments that actually do add up to really helping driven, motivated achievers perform at that level while still trying to protect their peace and their health.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.roan.com, that's Roan spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. When you think about it in the landscape of a bigger company, and so not a startup, think about an established company, I think one of the pieces of friction is who owns the responsibility around this, right? And there's a constant back and forth between the employer and the employee, even if it's not, a direct conversation around this. I'm interested in your take on this, and it doesn't have to be like a direct answer, but I'm sure you've had to kind of think about this.
Yeah, I really truly think it starts at the top and I think it trickles down from there. I think if you have a boss, and I don't mean just the CEO, like I mean you could be a middle manager that has 3 people under you, like you're still a boss, like to those 3 people. Like I think if you as the boss at whatever level are sending people emails around the clock, calling them, texting them at all hours of the day and night, sending them messages on the weekend, not ever taking time off yourself. Or when you are on vacation, you're still constantly checking emails and sending texts and stuff. You are telling your team that that's what you expect of them. And even if you're not trying to tell them that, that's what you're telling them. And so they don't feel like they can ignore that email until the next morning. They don't feel like they can go on vacation and truly just turn their computer and their phone off because you're constantly doing it when you're on vacation. So I really truly believe it starts at the top and trickles its way down. And I think it's up to us as leaders and managers at every level to set the tone and set the standard and let our teams know that it's okay to take time off. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to have a lunch hour. It's okay to not respond immediately. I mean, I have a friend that's another speaker, and in his signature on his emails, I think this is a brilliant move. He says something, don't quote me on this, he has it far more clever than this, but it says something like, my work hours may not be the same as yours. Please respond when you are working, or something like that. Because sometimes he gets a second wind at 10 o'clock at night and he bangs out a bunch of emails that he needs to do, but he never wants people to feel like they have to respond. That's just when he's gotten this boost of energy, And I think that's such a simple, easy way to tell people, like, listen, don't worry, you don't have to respond right now. This is just when I have time to get back to these emails,
What are your personal feelings on the state of uh, uh, the the state of balance right now? Meaning, Do you think we're trending in the right direction? Do you anticipate there's going to be a lot of ebbs and flows with regards to this topic in particular? I think that um, myself as a millennial, I definitely appreciate the charge coming from the generation below me. Um, and it's something that I feel like I wanted to come about from my generation. But at the same time, a lot of times, as we see in different areas of life, if you go too far one way, you tend to get pulled back in the other way. And I'm interested in your thoughts on the current state of affairs.
Yeah, I mean, I think one well, there are obviously the pandemic, a lot of horrible things happened, but I do think there were some good things that came from it. I think there's been a much greater awareness now on mental health. And I do think we have the pandemic and the fact that everyone was working from home and getting burnt out to thank for that. So I think it's a much more common topic now. It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the lexicon of what people talk about now. I think people are much more aware of it just globally, but also in themselves, in their teams. So that's all positive. The fact that we're talking about it and we're aware of it and it's much more common and not shameful to be speaking about so much, I think that's fantastic. I think the cat is out of the bag. My dad always says you can't put that genie back in the bottle, with in terms of like people working from home. Like we have proven that as a country, as a world, that we can work from home and still be successful. And so, yes, I think people are moving in the direction of being back in the office, hybrid. I think people are going to be damn hard to get them back in the office 100% of the time. I just think that genie's out of that bottle. You can't put that cat out in the bag. Like it's not going to happen. But I do think there's ebbs and flows. But I mean, yeah, we call it burnout now, we call it mental health, but like people have been talking about work-life balance since the dawn of times. Like it's the same thing, there's no difference. It's the same exact thing. And yeah, maybe eventually we call it something else, but it's still the same problem. People are forever trying to figure out, how do I continue to work hard and achieve and do well at work and make good money and have a fulfilling career, but also be healthy and have good relationships and be there and be able to spend time with the people that we love. That's forever a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the dynamics that's changing things now is just, I mean, the rise of technology has been going on for a long time. And I don't want to talk about AI because it's talked about in every single podcast and every single forum right now. But when you think about the amount of lifting we had to do as humans 100 years ago versus the amount of lifting we have to do now in whatever job that you're in, the truth of the matter is the amount of work or the amount of time you need to spend on one task back then versus now is radically different. And so it's just a matter of like agreeing on the fact that we can be more efficient now relative to how we were previously, just because
Yeah, and I
we've
think
been
there's a lot
fortunate to
more
have the tools. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, I think there's a lot more expected of everybody now too. This notion of just getting a job and staying there for your whole career, like that doesn't really happen anymore, like very damn few people. Most people, you really got to step up and perform all day and every day. And if you start not performing, like you will be called in and people notice and they're going to talk about how we can get you back on, performing. So I think there's a lot more expected of us. I also think we put a lot more pressure on ourselves now. There's more available. There's more ways that we can show off our wealth and people want to do that. And so we put our own pressure on ourselves because we want the nice car and we want the nice house and we want our kids to go to the private schools and we want this and we want all these little trophies. We put that pressure on ourselves too. It's not just our employers.
Yeah. So you had mentioned your own experience and being, asked if you wanted to resign and kind of having to navigate that scenario. And I want to give the audience a little bit more context about where your career went from there. And I want to
Yeah.
talk about, the other obstacles that may have came your way after making it past that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had that job as the head of marketing for about 6 or 7 years. And I really felt like I'd kind of done what I was going to do there. When I started, we were a $400 million company. When I left, we were an $11 billion company. Like my team grew from 4 people to 75 people. Like we grew exponentially. And we were growing exponentially before the pandemic as well. So I was really proud of what I accomplished there. I felt like I kind of had done what I was going to do, and I was just over it. I was burnt out. I was ready to do something else. And so as the head of marketing, I had put on this big event that we were doing. We'd hired a speaker. And I remember sitting in the audience knowing that we had paid this speaker $25,000 to speak for an hour. And I just remember sitting there being like, I could totally do this. Like, this guy is no more smart or charismatic than I am. Like, he's killing it. I can totally do this. And so I became friends with him. He helped me get started. And I really spent, after I had that kind of come to Jesus moment with my boss, I spent the next kind of year and a half, like, really getting my ducks in a row to pursue speaking. And it wasn't like this is coming out of left field. Like, I grew up doing musical theater on stage. I was a reporter for a while. So I was in front of camera a lot. I had interviewed a million people. I was very comfortable. I was the face of our company. So I was always in videos and this and that, like, this wasn't a super stretch. And I spoke at various industry conferences and stuff with my corporate hat on. But, it's very different to pursuing it full time as a full-time speaker. And so I kind of got my ducks in a row, got my website created my deck, my keynote, put my speaker reel together, all of that stuff, and eventually left and just started speaking. And it has thankfully gone very, very well. I've been very grateful, and I work with, speakers bureaus all over the place. And I do kind of like 50, 60 events a year. My book came out, The Type A Trap, that came out last year. That became an Amazon bestseller, which is super exciting. And it's just been fun. I really feel like this is the culmination of so many different things that I've done in my career. I guarantee you I wouldn't be able to be speaking today without all of the story and the experience that I had in my last corporate job, because that gives me a lot of credibility to stand on. And to talk about burnout and like all of the crap we went through the pandemic and healthcare. Like, I speak at a lot of healthcare organizations, and I speak for a lot of sales teams, high performing teams that are, a lot is expected of them, and they put a lot of pressure on themselves. And yet, how do they continue to meet those goals without sacrificing their health and their relationships? And so it's sort of all beautifully come together. But I love it. And, I know mile 40, like, I had my real mile 40 moment last year. I had a really difficult year, and I thought that me burning out a number of years ago was like rock bottom, but I didn't realize that was actually like the warm up act for last year. That was the real rock bottom. In the very short period of time, and I'll spare you the whole sob story, but basically my husband and I had been trying to buy a house. Real estate in San Diego is a joke. So scraped up money, bought a little shoebox, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,200 square foot, like fixer upper, gutted it, all these things, moved in. My very first house I've ever owned. And we had been trying to start a family for many years, had done multiple rounds of IVF, had miscarriages, failed adoptions, failed transfers, ended up using an egg donor, which is its own special type of grief that nobody talks about, because you're literally grieving the fact that this is not your biological child. And nobody talks about that, but it is a mind fill in the blank. And so I finally got pregnant, which was so exciting. And so 2 days after we moved in to our new house, we go to hear the heartbeat for the first time, and there is none. And so that, as you can imagine, is devastating. I'm sure some people listening have experienced that before. And then 3 weeks later, my husband accidentally killed our dog in a horrible accident. Our dog was only 3 years old, so he was still like such a young puppy. And for two people who don't have children, this dog was our life, like we just loved him. And that set my husband into a full mental breakdown, to the point that I needed to call 911, because I've literally never seen anything like it. And he was just completely out of his mind, relapsed on a drug addiction that he had in college. I ended up having to start staging an intervention, which is something I had never heard of or thought of before. I'd seen intervention on television. Okay. That was like the show, what the hell do I know about this? This is stuff I never thought I'd have to do. I'm starting to stage this intervention. We get him into rehab. He becomes not his best self, and our marriage falls apart. I end up moving out 7 months after I moved into my very first house. I only lived there for 7 months. Moved out, put my stuff in storage because I didn't know, everything was so up in the air. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I lived out of a suitcase, staying with friends and family. And thankfully, as a speaker, I travel a lot for work. But I was like, I don't know, do I get another house? Do I buy something? Do I rent? And part of me was just like, let me just put it in storage because I don't know what the hell's going on. So like literally in the span of like 4 months, I lost my baby, my dog, my husband to drugs and rehab, my marriage, my dream, my house, my dream of becoming a mother. Like all of these things in such a short period of time is a hell of a lot to unpack, you know? And it was really, really rock bottom. I mean, I've never had this before because I was always somebody who kind of worked hard and won. And now here it is, like all of this stuff just unfolding in front of me, and no amount of hard work was going to get me through it. And I really had to dig deep and start using all the tools that pulled me out of my burnout. They're the same tools that helped get me through this last year. And thankfully now I'm on the other side of it and I'm like feeling great, but it took a lot to get through that. And so again, I share a lot of the story on stage now. And, you know, all of these terrible things that happen to us, really, we can use for good. And this will be my absolute best year I've ever had in speaking this year. And I fully attribute part of that to the fact that my story has so much more depth now. It's so much more raw. It's so much more vulnerable, and it makes people relate so much better because they're like, oh my God, I had a year like that too. Their situation may be different, but just me talking about it on stage makes them feel so much more seen and heard and gives them hope that they can get through whatever tricky stuff they're going through as well.
Wow. That's a lot, as you can imagine. That's a lot to digest.
It's a lot. Yeah, shit, trust me.
I mean, you had to literally digest it, and not just digest it
It was
for the sake of a
a
conversation.
doozy. Yeah.
But you know, out of I guess my first question as you were sharing the story, and I did not realize the depths of the story, you know, before we connected. But did you blame yourself at first
For the miscarriage
any of it?
or for everything?
Everything?
I blamed myself more for the pregnancy stuff and the miscarriage and feeling like I wasn't able to do what my body's supposed to do. And it also, I mean, it didn't help that my husband kept telling me it was my fault. So I should say ex-husband. But like, I think there's definitely that. I think, sure, I probably had moments of thinking, oh, I should have called my ex, like when the day that the dog died, he left him in the car for 6 hours and forgot about him. And there were moments where I was like, I should have called him. I should have reminded him that Baxter was in the car. But then like, why would I have called him and reminded him that the dog was in the car? You know, like, trust me, I've had a lot of therapy the last year and a half getting through this. But, you know, I think there were moments and pieces of it where I blamed myself, but I didn't blame myself for the whole thing. No. But pieces of it, yes.
You know, you had mentioned that you had drawn from your previous experience at burnout to apply those skills to navigate through this. And I think, look, at the end of the day, and what's very mile 40 about that is the fact that you tend to go in fight or flight mode when you're in these scenarios, right? And what that means literally is your brain is just searching deep within for, when have I been in a very difficult moment before, and how did I claw myself out of it? That's literally what happened at mile 40 for me. Uh, and and to your point, that's how I birthed basically everything thereafter. Fundamentally, you know, this whole platform was founded on that experience of, you know, digging deep within and figuring out and navigating my way out of a dark moment. And, you know, I think about your scenario now, and I think about the correlation between the two. And what I want the audience to kind of take away from this is the specific tangible elements of navigating burnout that correlated to navigating your own personal scenario, just so they can kind of hear, like, where did you draw the lines?
Well, what's also interesting before I get to that, what's also interesting is that while last year was the toughest year personally I've ever had,
Mm.
it was the best year I'd ever had professionally.
And
Well,
that's
now
gonna be
this year,
my next question is, how did you show up on
yeah.
stage?
So this year I've surpassed it, but
Yeah,
at that time, that was the
yeah.
best year I'd ever had. My book came out, it was a bestseller. I spoke for Tony Robbins. I spoke for some incredible brands on huge stages. I made more money than I'd never made in my life last year. So I had this epic year professionally, even though my personal life was like a dumpster fire. Um, and I always tell this on stage because I want people to know, like, the two can coexist. Even if one area of your life is just dying and struggling and it's hard right now, doesn't mean that everything has to suck. It doesn't mean that everything that year is a write-off and you should just stop trying. Like, the two can coexist. And so some of the tools that I used that like helped get me through my burnout were just and that helped pull me through this were really focusing on connections. So like connecting with joy. What are those small moments of joy, that things that light me up, that get me excited, that make me smile? And these can be small little things. I call them little like pockets of peace. Like, how can you incorporate those in your days and your weeks? Because when you're super down, depressed, sad, overwhelmed, burnt out, whatever, these little things make such a huge difference. They might be the little 5-minute pick you up that you need that gets you through the next hour, that gets you through the next 2 hours. Are they going to solve all your problems? No, but these little things, when you can start incorporating them into your day and your weeks, they're small little boosts of pick me up throughout the week that help. So connecting with your little small moments of joy, connecting with your people. I tell the story on stage that, like, when I was at the depths of my burnout, I was in one of our executive leadership meetings that we would have every week. And I just looked around the room and I was just like, these are not my people. Like, they're just not my people. They were lovely. There was nothing wrong with them. I didn't hate them. Like, they were lovely, wonderful people. They just weren't my people. And so finding your group of people that get you, that excite you, that inspire you, that support you, whether they're friends, whether they're an alumni network, whether they're an industry group. So for me, there's a speaker group I'm a part of that have just become like my lifeline and my dearest friends. And so I really leaned into them last year, and that really helped pick me back up and also helped me do well professionally because they were all pouring into me. So connecting with your joy, connecting with your people, and reconnecting with your vision for your life. Like, why are you doing all of this? What is the purpose? Why are you working so hard? What are you working towards? What does that success look like? And really thinking through, like, your health, your wealth, for finances, fitness, fun, philanthropy, spirituality, like bucket lists. Like, what are those different pieces of your life? And really connecting with, like, are you doing the things that you want to be doing? And if you're not doing them, because some of them might take a while, are you at least moving in that direction? And so I think connecting with those things regularly, joy, people, and your vision, like, really, really help. I have a million other tools, but like, those are a few of them that helped get me through that. And again, they sound really simple, but
A
they
lot of
really
times it
make a
is,
huge
though.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, a lot of times it is really simple, and I think that that's the thing, is that we tend to
We overcomplicate stuff.
Yeah, we overcomplicate. Exactly. We make it more complicated than it is because we think the scenario is so complicated, it's so dark, it's so twisted, that the only way out has to be complicated as well, where a lot of times it's like in sports, like go back to the fundamentals, right? Like, just go back to the basics. And I think we take it for granted. And one thing I wanted to ask you about as it pertains to that year and the things that you had to navigate was, did you ever give yourself time to grieve? Did you allow yourself the grace to kind of like take a step back and be sad as things were happening?
No, because my husband was in such bad shape. So literally, I had the miscarriage, and 3 weeks later he killed the dog. And so I lost my baby. I really didn't have much time to grieve that. And then the dog died, and then that immediately threw him into this horrible mental breakdown. And so I literally had to like put the baby aside, put my dog aside, and deal with him, because he was like, I've never seen anything. It's straight out of a movie, you know? And so, and that lasted for a long time. And so it truly wasn't until I moved into this new house that I'm in January of this year that I really started to grieve. My first 3 weeks in this house, I could not stop crying. Even though I was like here, I had the new house now and life was good again, but I couldn't stop crying because I had been I had to pack the baby and the dog away for so long to deal with my husband's mental breakdown. And then I was like a nomad for 7 months, 6 months, trying to figure out what the hell I was doing, where I was going to go, am I going to buy? Am I going to rent? You know, it wasn't until I moved back into this house where I finally was settled again. I had my own space. I could breathe. I could rest and relax. And I literally cried for like 3-4 weeks straight. Just finally kind of letting go of also just the life that I thought I was going to have. You know, it was also hard to be back in San Diego and not have the baby, not have the dog, not have the house, not have the husband, not have this life that I was creating here, you know? And so it was just a lot to unpack. And yeah, I didn't grieve until I finally was back in my own space and felt safe and settled again. It was like it all just came bubbling out.
You know, I feel that as you speak, and I can imagine how those 3-4 weeks must have felt. And
Oh, it was awful.
I'd like you to kind of talk about that just for the audience, because I feel like a lot of times
Yeah.
people experience eras like you faced in different ways and in different capacities. And there is no right, like, this is not a grief show, and I'm not a specialist, but I think a lot of
Yeah.
people would
Nor
agree
am
there.
I.
I think a lot of people would agree there is no one way to grieve, but I do feel like it's important to go through that process, however which way it makes most sense for you. And, you know, I want the listeners to kind of lean into those 3 or 4 weeks to understand what that did for you. Was it, as much as it may have been a sad period, did it rejuvenate you, you know, once you kind of
Yeah,
worked
I mean,
through it?
I thankfully have an amazing therapist, and I had been working with her the whole time, even when I was, you know, transient, and when all of this stuff was happening with the baby and the dog and my husband and stuff. Like, I was working with her through all of that, but I wasn't ready to go there, type of thing. And so we do EMDR therapy. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like, it feels super woo woo. Like you just watch this ball go back and forth on the screen, and it like somehow rewires your brain. And listen, I'm not an expert on it. Do not quote me. Google this yourself, listeners. Like I'm not the expert on this, but a lot of people use it for PTSD. It's used for trauma. And it really has helped me process a lot of the trauma that happened. And, you know, my therapist gave me this phrase that has really stuck with me, where she says, the grief is yours, but the trauma we can process. And I had never separated those two things before. I was like, what do you, it's all the same, you know? And so she was like, the grief, no one can take your grief away. That is love that doesn't have anywhere to go right now. You know, the grief is yours, and you will live with it, and you will deal with it, and it will be yours for the rest of your life. The trauma is what we can heal. The trauma is what we can address. The trauma is what we can help alleviate. And so separating those in my mind was really helpful. I feel like that really helped me better understand what I was working with and dealing with. But yeah, I mean, I exercised a lot. I also got a new puppy, and it took me a long time after what happened to Baxter, our dog, to get another dog. And that in and of itself was hard, because I was like, am I cheating on my dog? Does he think I'm
Yeah.
replacing him? You know, like I cried so much about getting another dog, because I just felt like, oh my God, is Baxter going to think that I don't love him anymore, or that I've replaced him after what happened? And, you know, it's been incredibly healing having another puppy around. You know, puppies, they're little shits, but they're like the cutest little things ever. And that has been really healing to have another dog around, and also to just have a little sidekick in the house, because I was used to having my ex-husband in the house for years, and then now to live alone, it's nice to have, the company of a pup. And what's also been wonderful is that because I had a new puppy, I don't have a gated in backyard, but my front yard is all grass, but there's no gate around it or like fence around it. So I was out in the front yard, gosh, a million times a day taking the dog out. I met all the neighbors. I met all the kids. There's all these kids on my street. And I've now feel fully embedded in this little community that I moved to. But I wouldn't have had that. I guarantee you, if I didn't have the dog, I wouldn't have been outside and met all these people. But because I had to go outside all the time with the dog, I met all the kids. I met the parents. We have wine together. The kids come over, knock on the door, and ask if Winston can come out and play. So there's just so many little things that have all made me feel safe, made me feel comfortable, made me feel settled and at home again. And it's just interesting how it all eventually comes together.
Absolutely. Erin, in hearing you speak, I can't help but think about just the power of lived experience and that lived experience on stage. I mean, this is real, it's raw, it's authentic, and you know, there's no better way to teach it. And in speaking to you, I know exactly why you do what you do, and I know why you're the person who is right. To have the microphone in her hand on stage, and it makes perfect sense. And it even makes more sense that despite the fact that you were in a pretty dark era, you still powered through to show up, and you did it with grace, and you did it incredibly well. And so on my end, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for opening up with everything, that you've had to endure with us. And for showing us the light. Like the truth is that you could have been in a lull for a very long time. You could, the fact that this happened last year and that you're here today speaking about it with me, not to, mention the fact that you're speaking about it in front of big audiences, says a lot about who you are. And you gave yourself the time to face it head on, and you did
Yeah.
the
And I'm
work.
honestly having my best year ever. By March of this year, I had already surpassed all of my 2024 income. So,
Incredible.
the story's resonating. And so, as shitty as it was, now that I've been incorporating it into my talk, it's resonating and it's making me want to be in demand to speak on more stages, because it resonates. Lots of people go through really challenging times, and it's nice to know you're not alone. It's nice to see someone that's on the other side, and everybody can get through it. We all have challenges. Nobody gets a free ride. We all have different stuff that we're dealing with, and despite all of that, you can still have a great year, and you can still come through the other side and find happiness again and find light and, that sort of beauty again.
Absolutely. Erin, thank you so much. This means the world to me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me here.
You got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.